The Minnesota Vikings find themselves in that kind of awkward, weird spot. And when I say awkward, weird spot, I mean kind of that abyss of mediocrity. If I was talking about pro wrestling, I would talk about it being mid-card hell. Here, it's just that abyss of mediocrity. The worst spot you could be. Yes, they were NFC North champs in 2022. That's true. They deserved it. But they also got bounced in the opening round in the playoffs at home against the Giants. And it's hard to see them as a real, serious, true threat in terms of a championship contender. Even I think most Vikings fans would agree to that. And you also look at this team and you say their trajectory is stagnant to downward. Kirk Cousins certainly is not a scrub look. Like, you say what you want about Kirk Cousins, but he's a pretty damn good NFL starting quarterback. Is he elite? Is he that level of dude? Absolutely fucking not. Let's not get crazy here. But a lot of teams could do a hell of a lot worse than Kirk Cousins as their starting quarterback. But he's certainly not in the class of the Mahomeses and the Burrows, you know what I mean? And the Allens and the Herberts and the Lawrences, the Jalen Hurtses. He's not at that level. And some are going to say, well, he's a better passer than Hurts. Hurts does entirely different things as a runner that Cousins can't. Cousins is a good NFL starting quarterback, but he's not that dude. And he's also on the wrong side of 30, so you need to start thinking about the future. And meanwhile, the Minnesota Vikings are not in a position realistically to be able to get that heir apparent right now. So really tough and bad spot for the Vikings. So they've got to figure out a way to squeeze more juice out of the turnip. And that might be pretty tough for them to do. So you look to the draft and you say, hey, one way that you can do that is you get some real difference makers. You get some real impact players. And I would say for day one of the draft, the Vikings, their approach was pretty solid in terms of just let the board fall to them, get in where they fit in, and they were able to. They came in at the end of that wide receiver run that started at pick 20, and with the Seahawks with taking Jackson Smith-Njigba, and then pick 21 with the Chargers taking Quentin Johnston, 22 the Ravens take Zay Flowers, and then here come the Vikings at 23, and they're taking Jordan Addison from USC. You know, you'll see some of the folks online, especially those like analytics heads, that'll be talking about his RAS score was below 6, and that's not good and not the type of athlete you should be taking in round one. You know, I've seen other people point out, hey, Calvin Ridley's RAS score was even worse, as was DeAndre Hopkins. Yes, RAS is a interesting metric. It could be helpful, but it's not the be-all, end-all. And we need to stop acting as if it is. Because there are plenty of guys that will score a 9 and above that can't play for shit. Athlete alone does not make you a great football player. And when you think about Jordan Addison, here's a guy at Pittsburgh in 2021, and then going to USC in 2022. You see those flashes of a dude that could be really damn good as a player. The tape trumps the freaking measurables and the run numbers, the jump numbers, and everything else. And the Vikings, being able to sit there, are also able to address their biggest offensive need. You know, they get a guy about in the right spot of where you would have expected Jordan Addison to go. Was going to be somewhere between 20 and 39 in this draft realistically. So taking him at 23 is right in the sweet spot of where he should have went. They addressed their biggest need, but they don't have to reach to do so. Like, that's solid. So I look at the Vikings on day one, and I say I like the fit for Jordan Addison, especially because you're looking at him coming in as being a wide receiver 2 opposite of Justin Jefferson. I think gives you a little more value out of him as opposed to expecting Addison to come in and have the pressure of having to be the number 1 guy. I give the Vikings a B for their day one performance because they stayed there, you know, allowed the board to kind of fall to them, and didn't panic when the wide receivers started going. They said, hey, we got to this point, we'll be able to get one of these guys. And I thought the guy was a really good fit for them. So I gave him a B. Now for day 2, there wasn't much happening here for the Vikings, right? Because you think about it, they traded their second round pick during the middle of the season last year to the Lions so they could bring in TJ Hawkinson to address the tight end position. And realistically, most people would probably take TJ Hawkinson over just about anybody you would have been able to draft in the second round this year, right? So you got to count that into the grading. So their only pick on day 2 was late in round 3, and that's Mekhi Blackmon. He's a physical man cover corner with speed. You know, type of guy you take there at the end of round 3 that has some real starter potential for them. I like the thought of him being able to come in for them and be a starter in year 1. I gave him a C+ on day 2, and the only reason I did that is they traded the second round pick for Hawkinson, which in a bubble seems like it makes sense. They didn't just give him a second round for him, mind you. But this was also a really damn good tight end class this year. So maybe it would have been better off keeping the second round pick and going with a younger option so you didn't have to then trade for Hawkinson and then give him a big contract. So, you know, just slightly above average performance there on day 2. And then day 3, I think they got some good value and upside as well. I look at Jay Ward. He's a leader, versatile defensive back. I think he does have some starter potential. Jaquelin Roy was somebody I was looking at in terms of the Bears, especially as you got to day 3, talking about a guy that I think can be a starter. He has that type of upside. So getting him at the beginning of round 5 was nice work for the Vikings. I thought Jaren Hall personally was a tad overdrafted here by taking him where they did in round 5, but I understand it, you know, because they had a few more quarterbacks get drafted this year than I thought was going to happen for sure. So, you know, you're talking about drafting a young, you know, second string, third string quarterback. Hey, like, that's a worthwhile pick. If Jaren Hall sticks on the roster even as your QB3, you're talking about a position that you have to invest very, very, very little in from a salary cap standpoint. That's how you should do this thing. Also, when you look at their 7th round pick, DeWayne McBride, like, he's got some fumble issues, some other concerns there, but he's got some real talent. Like, he has more talent as a running back than you would typically associate with the 7th round pick. He's got a shot to make the roster and contribute, especially at some point if the Vikings end up moving off of Dalvin Cook and trading him away. It would open up an opportunity potentially for McBride to get some run in year 1. And I think if you did plunk him into a lineup in year 1, as long as he didn't fumble the damn ball, he's got a shot, man. He's got a shot. He would at least be a valuable role player in the backfield. So I gave them like a C+ on day 3. Not a ton of maneuvering, not picking up additional draft pick capital for the most part for 2024. But some solid picks there. Like I said, reached a bit for Jaren Hall, but I kind of understand that. Overall, I think the Vikings did a decent job of finding guys that could play and contribute. Like, I look at their draft as more solid than I do spectacular. You get what I mean? And this is one of these things, like, you can like what a team does. You can like some of the players that they take, their approach, but not be overwhelmed or overpowered by it. I certainly don't think it was an above-average draft performance. I don't think it was a great or exceptional draft performance. So I'm not going to sit there and give them like, hey, they were an A- or a B+. No, that's ridiculous. Like, I see some of these draft grades that come out, and my biggest problem with them is not that people actually do draft grades or even how they grade them. Sometimes, like, we all have different opinions and different perspectives, and some of my perspectives and opinions are based off of how I had players ranked on the big board, so it certainly has a bias there. But my bigger problem is they'll grade all 32 teams, and then like 10 or 12 of them have an A. Bullshit. There aren't that many teams every year that are good at the draft. I promise you they're not. We know they're not. So let's cut the crap. So I thought they found several, guys that could contribute. A couple of guys on day 2, day 3 that could be future starters. I look at Addison, though, and say he's the only real projectable, potential impact starter that I see right now. And even then, he's a wide receiver, too. I think the overall impact of this draft class is largely tied up into Jay Ward and Jaquelin Roy in terms of what they could do. Can they be contributors? Can they take starting roles in 2023, 2024? If they do, then this draft class probably looks a little better. As it stands right now, I think this was an average-ish draft class for the Vikings, so I give them a grade of C+. With where they were drafting, the picks that they had, there's only but so much you're going to be able to do. So, Kwesi, I thought he had a solid performance, but not spectacular.